introduction and
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start today actually with a amazing video that was recently unearthed, and it is actually, Dr. Carson, if you could talk a little bit about it, and then we'll show it. We haven't showed it to this community yet.
oh, okay. Yes, this was the recording of Martin Luther King in a previous election on November 3rd. And
1964.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Why don't you just, do you want to share your screen and run it? Or
Yes.
I don't have it, so.
Give me 1 minute.
If you don't have it handy, I can do it.
Yeah, why don't you do it, Truman? Thank you.
Okay. Give me a second. I hope my audio, sometimes it doesn't work good from my computer, but hopefully this works.
Suffice it to say that we stand in one of the most momentous periods of human history. And in these days of emotional tension, when the problems of the world are gigantic in extent and chaotic in detail, all men of goodwill must make the right decisions. And on Tuesday, 1 week from today, the people of this nation must decide whether they want America to remain true to the great words of the founding fathers. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must decide whether those words will be firmly etched into the structure of our nation, or whether we will allow our nation to be relegated to a second-rate power in the world with no moral voice. We must decide next Tuesday whether America will take the high road of justice and peace and compassion for the poor and underprivileged, or whether this nation will tread the low road of man's inhumanity, the man of injustice, of short-sightedness. Each of us has a moral responsibility, if we are of voting age and if we are registered, to participate in that decision. I come here to urge every person under the sound of my voice to go to the polls on the 3rd of November and vote your convictions. Now, I know you're intelligent people, and I don't need to tell you who you should vote for. I don't have any fear about that. You know who to vote for. I'm just asking you to vote. Now, just if you need, very seriously, never before in the history of our nation, as a candidate for the presidency, taken such a negative stand on the demands of our Judeo-Christian heritage for justice, and understanding, goodwill, and compassion for the poor, and peace. And so all men of goodwill will go to the polls on November the 3rd. And I hope we will have a great day in our nation, so that when we wake up on the 4th of November, we will know that America has made the right decision.
Wonderful. Thank you, Truman.
Yep, no problem.
Okay, so everyone, thank you for being here. And we have an exciting conversation to be had today, led by Jonathan Greenberg. Jonathan's been a member of the GKGI network since the beginning, and he taught at Stanford University at the law school for 30 years, and then was recruited by Clarence Jones to start the Institute for Nonviolence and Social Justice up at the University of San Francisco. So he's the associate director there now, and he's going to lead us in a discussion about what happens, what do we do if civil unrest breaks out after next week's election. So with that, Jonathan, I'll hand it over to you. He's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. And you can either raise your hand or unmute yourself and start speaking the way we normally do for the Q&A. And I just want to let everybody know I'm having problems with my Zoom right now. I don't see most people, and those that I do see are named, all the names are scrambled. So I might need some help, Truman, with calling on people.
Alyssa, thank you so much. One quick question. If I can push share screen and show my PowerPoint, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. So thank you for having me. And I want to say a couple things before I begin. One is that Dr. Claiborne Carson has been a mentor of mine for many, many years. And I admire him so much and everything that the Martin Luther King Institute has done at Stanford for all these years, and including launching the Gandhi King Global Network with all of you. So I'm very honored to be here. I'm speaking today without any special expertise. I'm speaking as a citizen, a concerned citizen, which is true for everybody here, although some of you are living in other countries. So of course, we're going to be focused on the US today. It'll be interesting to have perspectives from other countries. We have a lot of differences in our democracy. Many of them are unfortunate. We don't have one person, one vote in this country. We don't have a system where the people who win the most votes win. We have a much more convoluted system. So I'm going to focus on the issues that I think everyone has been concerned about. I think the video that Dr. Carson and his team uncovered is unbelievable. It's just chillingly prescient, as you all can see. And it suggests that so much was achieved and so much has been lost, both over these years. So I want to go right to the topic. I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes because there's a lot to cover, and then open it up to discussion. So I'm going to go to shared screen here. Hopefully that will, no, host disabled participant screen sharing. Alyssa, can you fix that?
Let's see if I can.
I can, we can either do it. Let me try to do it right now. Let's see.
Before we begin,
Okay,
I want
it
to
should-
say
it should
that
work now, I'm sorry.
let's see if it works. Oh yeah, it works now. Okay. Just a moment. Okay, so everyone can see that.
Yes.
I'm going to share my thoughts with you, as I say, which are very preliminary. Everybody on this call has feelings and thoughts, and I want to emphasize both. So I hope we get a chance to talk about both as we have the second half of our discussion today. So I want to start out by saying that I am far less worried about all of this than I was a month ago. If you remember, we had those incidents in Portland where the National Guard was brought in. And we had those problems in Wisconsin. Trump was clearly doubling down on the concept of having law and order be his theme. And it was very worrisome at that time, but it seems that it hasn't been successful or as successful as he wished. We don't know what's going to happen. These polls were wrong last time, and 1 in 10 could be wrong. It could be vastly underestimated. It also even 1 in 10 is a higher chance than I feel comfortable with. So I just want to say, I'm not a doomsayer, and I don't believe that, I actually believe that we're likely to get through peacefully, but I still believe it's important and essential to prepare and think about it. You know, to me, it's unlikely we're going to know the results, as you guys know, on Tuesday night, but it's not impossible. Florida should have the results. And if Biden wins Florida, it's very, very hard for Trump to win. So I actually am going to keep my computer screen glancing at Fox News, because I think if Fox News calls the election for Biden, then I think it's over and we're not going to have, the worst fears that people have. So let's hope. This is from yesterday. Governor Newsom announced that he's preparing state of California for civil unrest following the election. This is happening all over the country because people are taking precautions. We don't know what's going to happen. So we have to think about it and prepare. I also want to say that the reality is that President Trump has been deliberately, relentlessly threatening to invalidate the votes of millions of citizens. And he may not do it. It could all be bluster, which it often is. But I actually use as a lot of helpful reference Masha Gessen. Many of you know her. She wrote a week after Trump was was elected in 2016, an article in which she says that let me move this so you can see. Are you able to see the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you can see, believe the autocrat, he means what he says. And she comes from Russia, of course. So the fact that there's a lot of bluster, and there's often bluster, doesn't mean we should discount it, because sometimes it means what it says. I want to talk about civil unrest. Civil unrest is a very vague term, and I'm deliberately using it in ways that could be such a broad spectrum, from the Salt March of 1930 to Kristallnacht of 1938, almost opposite, in terms of nonviolent resistance and violent street incidents. Civil unrest is kind of a neutral term. It includes all of these, which some of them, we would be participants in nonviolent resistance. Some of them we would be horrified because of the violence. So everyone's afraid, well, is our system strong enough? What if it breaks down? And the thing that I want to say at the beginning that is, I think, in many ways unfortunate, but the most important thing from a legal point of view is we don't have a system. There is no system. There's 50 or 51 systems, 51 with District of Columbia. Each state has a completely different system. There's no coherence in the system. The only thing that there is in terms of federal election law is that states have to certify their final results 5 weeks after Election Day. And then on Monday, December 14th, we'll have the Electoral College. And the Electoral College has this arcane definition in which states appoint electors, which is potentially a source of abuse. So I'd like to go through some, briefly, 3 categories of scenarios that I think we should think about. The first is between now through the end of the day on Tuesday. And the main issue there is voter intimidation. And then the next is the period of time from the day after election through the inauguration, where either side could claim the other side stole the election. We need to take to the streets. I think that in one hand, we would have violence, and the other, hopefully, organized nonviolence. And then the third, I hope we can get to briefly, is the importance of nonviolence, organized protest under the best results if Biden is inaugurated. So let's talk about these in order. First, voter intimidation issue. Well, why should we be concerned? There's reason to be concerned. Trump has called out for 50,000 of his supporters to be mobilized. They actually call it the Army for Trump. They call them to go to the polling places and make sure that the bad things don't happen. They say this should happen in problem areas. This is all, dog whistles that are loud and clear that pro-Trump supporters may try to go to Black and brown communities and intimidate people. There's a history of this. And there was an egregious case in New Jersey in 1981 where the Republican National Committee sent people in fake official uniforms to go out and intimidate people and stop them to vote. And when that happened, there was a court order negotiated between the parties that prohibited the RNC from getting engaged in any kind of monitoring programs. They couldn't do it. They were prohibited by the court. But that court ban ended a couple of years ago. So we don't know what that means. And unfortunately, and this is the great shame of our country, especially when we have international guests, we have guns everywhere. There are 6 states that ban guns at polling places. There are 4 states that ban the concealed guns. That means 40 states allow people to bring guns into the polling places. Okay, so all of these things are reason for concern. But there's reasons to be calm. The first is that the center of activity this year is not, the role of the polling places is much diminished. This, believe it or not, Texas, 95% of the voters have already voted. And all over the country, the majority of voters have already voted. So that's important. So what should we do about this issue? I think we should stay calm and not be intimidated and vote, that's for sure. And then it's very important to not be thrown off by the disinformation and misleading information on social media. Yes, in 40 states, people can bring guns, but if they use a gun, they're going to be prosecuted. There's no right to use guns. Of course, it's intimidating, but any actual violence will be it's a criminal offense. So and I think the police are well aware that this is a tense time. And I want to mention a couple other things. There's, in terms of how do you get good information, I want to show a couple. In a little while, I'll show you, I think I have it in the next slide, one place. And also, you can volunteer, and we can talk about it later, but there's many ways to volunteer to be a obviously peaceful monitor at the polling places if you wish. Later, I'll show you the site that has the election information. So the next category is, and I think this is obviously the most concerning, is the period after November 4th. And this could lead to civil unrest if either side claims victory. So I'd like to start by looking at the, what if Biden declares victory and Trump says that it's fraudulent, which he's, claimed to be doing for months now, based on his assessment that the ballots should be banned if they're mail-in and all that kind of stuff. So, he did say stand down and stand by. So, the what if issue is, what if, directly or indirectly, he said it's time for the loyal Second Amendment Americans who care about defending America to come out and defend me and America. And if that were to happen, it would be very worrisome, obviously. We have a lot of militias in this country, unfortunately. We saw some of them in the Wisconsin setting. Unfortunately, the vast majority of military veterans in this country are not part of these militias. But unfortunately, a quarter of the militias are made up of military veterans who are trained to use advanced weaponry. And there's unbelievable arsenal of guns. So yes, there's a lot to worry about. So what should we do? Again, if the margin of Biden victory is overwhelming, I don't think there's any chance this will happen. I think that the closer the numbers are, the more risk this is. And in the worst case scenario, I think first is to remain calm, stay away from harm. It's not, you don't want to put yourself in harm's way if that were to happen. It's much more likely for there to be lone wolf incidents than massive incidents. And to the extent that people go into the street, it's urgent that we insist on discipline, nonviolence as a response. And we have to reject any kind of claims to respond in kind through violence, because that provides exactly the opportunity that Trump wants to blame both sides and send in the National Guard and declare an emergency or something like that. So we have to be extremely disciplined, and I think to support law enforcement, because the last thing they want is people shooting at people. So, I think in the most worst case scenario, if there's some militia people that shoot civilians, I think there would be an overwhelming, crushing public response to end all of this and to get Trump out of there. So I do think this is of concern, but for these reasons, I think there's reasons to be calm. The next area is actually perhaps the most important for this group, which is that what if Trump engineers illegitimately an effort to stay in power when he's disenfranchising Americans, he's found ways to throw out their votes or declare their votes null, and declares victory before the full count of absentee ballots. So if this were to happen, there's already a movement in preparation to respond through nonviolence. So as I mentioned federal election law earlier, it's this whole issue of the unfortunate electoral college system makes it more complicated. So what I want to do is show you a few different slides here. Just a moment. All right, so this first one, and then we can make sure you all get these. We'll make sure everybody gets these web addresses. Afterwards, I'll talk to Alyssa. So this is the Election Incident Reporting Project, which is an international project that I found. To get accurate information, it gives you all the incidents. And if you go to the sort and filter, you can see when they happened in the last 24 hours. So, and they include incidents of civil unrest of both types, both violent and nonviolent. So you can, if you heard a rumor about something, you can check it. And then also, obviously, many of us are glued to 538, and they have tracking updates of what's going on, which is also very good information. So Ken Budigan, who might be on this call, has been a member of our network. He writes in a recent posting that in the last half century, we've seen many powerful and largely successful nonviolent pro-democracy struggles, and he lists many of them. And he says, and now we may be on the verge of a pro-democracy struggle of our own. I'm convinced that nonviolent struggle will be critical to engaging this impending crisis and to the future of the nation. So in that event, we have to be, it will be the test for all of us. So there's a organization that's developed called Choose Democracy. Many of you might know this, that's trying to prepare for this event. They say democracy is fragile. We have reason to worry that this fall we may see an undemocratic power grab, a coup. We also know that people can defend our democracy. Nonviolent mass protests have stopped coups in other places, and we may have to do the same in this country. Elections work because the public agrees to honor the results. Similarly, coups work only if the public honors them. When the public refuses to accept the coup as legitimate, coups fall apart. Refusal looks like millions of people using nonviolent tools to delegitimize the coup. by demonstrating, resisting orders, and shutting down the country until democracy prevails. So that's why we're committing now. And they have this pledge. The pledge is we will vote. 2, we will refuse to accept election results till all the votes are counted. 3, we will nonviolently take to the streets if a coup is attempted. 4, if we need to, we will shut down this country to protect the integrity of the democratic process. I have a couple of observations. One of them is that Dr. Carson knows so well that, and as you all know, I work closely with Dr. Clarence Jones. For example, in Birmingham, Alabama, when the business community understood that it was in their interests to solve the problem of segregation because they couldn't function in a normal way and have a normal business, they put pressure to resolve this matter. And that's, in a local case, a very similar kind of a model. Now, let me start with some problems. The first problem, as I mentioned, we have 51 systems. Every state has a different system. So when we talk about we will refuse to accept election results till all the votes are counted, what does that mean? The problem is it's subject to contention. Most of the states, so when we file a claim with the IRS, our tax returns on April 15th, if we get it postmarked April 15th, it doesn't matter when it arrives, as long as it's postmarked April 15th. But there's 51 rules in terms of absentee ballots in the United States. And in most cases, it's not about when it's postmarked. It has to be received by election day. There's a few states that have it after, and then there's a bunch of states that have some complicated rules. And then there has been a very messy series of litigations that have gone to the Supreme Court on all of these issues, because the federal court has intervened and said, because of COVID, we're going to extend the day by a few days because otherwise people's fundamental rights are being violated. And then the court is going to go to the Supreme Court, already has, and in some cases they've said, well, we're not going to allow the federal court to extend. So there's going to be huge debates. So the problem is, when have all the votes been counted is going to be very difficult. One answer that I think we should have is that for sure, 100%, according to state law, at a minimum, you have to count all the ballots that come in by that day. So for example, if Donald Trump declares victory before all those are counted, and it'll take 5 or 6 days to count those, that would be in this category of votes are not counted. The problem is there's going to be many, many votes coming in that won't be counted because they missed these deadlines. This is the Transition Integrity Project, which is a bipartisan group of 100 current and former senior government and campaign leaders. One of the most important things in the event of a worst case scenario, the most important strategy is to be as centrist and bipartisan and expansive as possible. So if you look here, you can review these yourselves, but it's trying to warn people that don't think about election night as the night everything will be resolved. There will be contesting, there'll be disruptions. We have to mitigate these risks, etc. This is from the recent concurring opinion by Justice Kavanaugh a few days ago in Wisconsin, and where they decided that the federal court's extension of the absentee ballots for a week was going to be overturned. And he writes, for important reasons, most states, including Wisconsin, require absentee ballots to be received by election day, not just mailed by election day. Those states want to avoid the chaos and suspicions of impropriety that can ensue if thousands of absentee ballots flow in after election day and potentially flip the results of an election. Now, this has been a very controversial sentence because it implies that the results of the election were already determined, but you don't flip the results until you have the results. And you can't have the results till you count all the ballots. So these are some of the issues that are coming up. And it's one of the reasons why the Republicans rushed to get Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court. And everyone who remembers what happened with Gore v. Bush v. Gore, you know, we hope that it doesn't go to that point because there could be these kinds of technical issues. And then we'd have very huge struggles about how to respond. Stephen Zunis is a colleague of mine at the University of San Francisco. And he wrote an excellent essay about looking at many, many cases when there have been a nonviolent resistance against seizures of power. And I want to just emphasize his conclusion. A main practical finding of this monograph is that the goal of pro-democracy resistance against coups should be about defending society, you know, defending democracy, defending the country, not a particular physical location. The defense of a society threatened by a coup relies on widespread mobilization, building alliances, nonviolent discipline, and refusal to recognize illegitimate authority. So I want to review those quickly. Widespread mobilization means it has to be as big as possible. Building alliances is central across as broad a spectrum as possible, including with centrist mainstream organizations. Nonviolent discipline is urgent because any excuse to clamp down will be seized, and that's all they will play on Fox News. And refusal to recognize illegitimate authority is the core principle. So I'm going back to this Choose Democracy. If you look, there's all kinds of information here about how to get involved with local groups. If you want to go to the polls to be a monitor, you can sign up, how to write letters, and what to do if we need to hit the streets. And then there's trainings, which I recommend. There's one coming up tonight if people want to do it. And there's one on November 1, November 5th, led by George Lakey. Many of you know, very well-known nonviolence strategist and thinker. So this, and then there's all kinds of resources and documents. This is another group called Protect the Results. And if you can see, they have events you can participate in. And then this is Pace e Bene, a Catholic nonviolence group, which is excellent. And there's a local group in our Bay Area called East Point Academy that has trainings and engagement, and they're involved. So there's many ways to be involved. So as I say, I hope and I believe it will be unnecessary, but we have to be prepared. And the last thing I want to say is, in the best case scenario, if Biden is elected, in the best case scenario, there's a new regime in Washington. The Democrats control both houses of Congress. Even in the best case scenario, and I think Dr. Carson would emphasize this, this is precisely the moment. And I go back to 1964, the opening that we shared with Dr. King. 1964 was a transformative year because after a dozen years or more of grassroots activism in the civil rights movement, we got to the point where the legislature was primed and ready to take action. And the famous story is that you probably know that after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Dr. King went to see President Johnson, and President Johnson, and I'm oversimplifying, but he said, "Aren't you glad we did it?" And he said, "Of course I am. And now we need a Voting Rights Act immediately because people are being disenfranchised, prevented to vote, and it's intolerable." And President Johnson effectively said, "Well, I agree with you, but I can't do it. I used all my power to get give me a break. This was just last year." And they left, and Andy Young asked Dr. King, "Well, what are we going to do?" Dr. King said, "Well, we're going to get him some power." So I think that in the best case scenario, This is a moment when all of the struggles from Black Lives Matter, the moral reckoning that we've gone through as a nation can come to fruition, but only with the pressure that comes from giving power to the people who are going to make legislation equivalent to the major legislation we had in the 1960s. I look forward to your response, your thoughts, and your feelings. Thanks so much.
Hi, Dr. Jonathan Greenberg. First of all, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us about the election results. My question is, now that Amy Coney Barrett is in the Supreme Court, is there a possibility that Trump could use that as an advantage for his reelection?
The answer is yes. But again, if there is major, if Biden wins by, 9 or 10% or over, I think it's all over. I don't think it's going to only go to the Supreme Court if people, I think there's people on this call who are too young to remember, but many of us remember we spent days and days dealing with the hanging chads of Florida and the recount because it was so unbelievably close. And that's what ended up going into the court. So we just have to pray there's an overwhelming vote, and then we're not going to have those problems. The problems will arise if it's very, very close. And unfortunately, because of the system, it can be very, very close in Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in one particular state that could trigger these issues. And yes, there's a lot to worry about in the way that the judges are going to, first of all, what you have, when I talked about 51 systems, the great majority of those systems are legislatures run by Republicans. And those legislatures have systematically created more restrictive voting laws. But that's the law of that state. So when it gets to the Supreme Court, Justice Kavanaugh says, well, we have to follow the law of the state. So there's a lot of issues that could come if we have a very close election that we have to be rigorously involved in. And then obviously I'm not involved, but there are, quote, armies of lawyers on both sides. And we've got on our side unbelievably good lawyers who are going to argue and do their best. But with this Supreme Court, it's terrifying if it were to go to the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
And if people have a question, jump in. But if people have a feeling or anything they want to share, please do.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, again for presenting to us. I think, this is something.
I'm sorry, one thing, please introduce yourself briefly. Just say who you are so we all can know.
Oh, great. My name is Karen Bustamante. I am a community organizer with the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center in Oakland.
Oh, great.
And thank you for your presentation. It's very, very timely. I think, especially the stay calm vote is, something very important to us. Freedom Center students, staff, family members have been doing a lot of get out the vote type of work over the last month. We've been going to about like 5,000 doors or so here in Oakland,
Wonderful.
calling hundreds of people with the same message, we have to get out and vote. And of course, I think, us being a very diverse group of people with the League of Women Voters and our youth and families, talking to people really inspires others. And I think that that's one of the key points that, keeps hope alive, but also keeps the community, with that kind of like calming notion. But, I think that the rest of the points that you're making on how to be prepared is really, really important. So again, thank you. For your presentation. Very, very timely.
Thank you. One thing that you underlie is that even when these threats are mostly bluster in the case of Trump, the threats of voter intimidation are a form of voter intimidation. Mm-hmm. And so we have to counter those by, exactly the kind of work that you're doing, Karen, is to get out the vote and be calm and protect people who vote. Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Greensburg. My name is Fatima, and I'm a student of the Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center.
Hi, Fatima.
Hi. I really appreciated how you started off the presentation by saying, I'm not a specialist or a professional, but I'm talking as a concerned citizen. And when you gave a really deep dive into the two potential situations that could happen, you know, Trump makes fraudulent claims or Trump finds a way to legitimately stay in power, it really made me realize that our civics classes in, you know, a regular high school or even in like the local institutions that we have here are not even going to compare to the amount of information that I've received today regarding, you know, a relevant context of what could potentially happen in the next few days. So I really appreciate the deep dive and, you know, the clear instructions. I think one thing that was really helpful was that it was practical. Like it legitimately said like what you should be doing, like stay calm, vote, understand where your information comes from.
Yeah.
And it didn't make things like really heady or idealistic. Like these are some things that you can actually be doing. And I
Good.
think that's very much lost in civic classes or anything like that. So I really appreciate that clear instruction of what to
So,
do.
Fatima, thank you so much. First of all, I want to say I'm a huge fan of the Martin Luther King Freedom Center, which, as many of you know, is based in Oakland and engages hundreds of high school students in basic fundamental participation in our society, in civics, and in Kingian nonviolence. So I want to say one thing to you, Fatima, which is that in the, which I believe, unlikely event, but in the possible event that there will be a need for nonviolent struggle, if there's a fraudulent claim of power by Trump, I think that high school students and college students will have to play a very important role, as they did throughout the civil rights movement, as Dr. Carson knows. And so we have to communicate with our parents, our teachers, our schools, and each other, support each other, and then work with each other, and then fundamentally maintain and understand and maintain nonviolent discipline.
Of course. Yes, I completely agree. It's a very, pivotal moment in history. Like even my own parents are concerned about, you know, no one is really unaware of the results that could have been violent and non-violent after the election. Even my youngest siblings are aware of, you know, the type of circumstances that we could be, you know, dealt with. So completely.
And I feel like and again, in the hopefully unlikely event there's a need, but I imagine that engaging high school principals, high school teachers, and engaging students in classes and in family around the kitchen table, that's going to be a huge part of what it's all about.
I agree.
Jonathan, one of the things that I thought was good about your presentation is that you're looking at after inauguration. And I think it's very important for all of us to recognize that we'll have this sigh of relief if Biden is elected and takes office. But to me, that's only the start of the struggle, because I think that he will be, you know, as you put it, quoting the Johnson quote about who's going to give him the power, who is going to push him in what direction. I don't see him as a person who is going to even be the change maker that Lyndon Johnson was. Lyndon Johnson kind of came out of the New Deal background, and he thought of the 60s as another occasion for a New Deal. And he called it the Great Society programs, you know, the war on poverty, you know, all these kinds of things that were very ambitious. I don't see that coming out of Biden's brain, quite frankly, or out of his background. And I think the only way that's going to work is to mobilize. Now, in your scenario, if there's a disputed election, it's also, and I think you mentioned this, a question of whether protests will be seen as violence. And a lot of that is simply the perception of it. You know, all of us have been in protests, and we kind of hold our breath until we see, well, how is this being reported on the news? And there could be looting a mile away, but that becomes the protest if the news media chooses to make it that way. And so I think it becomes very important for us to really think about how massive protests can be managed. One thing that's very striking to me is that when I go to a protest and there's no sense of monitoring, there's no sense of someone who is there trying to keep, even establish relationship with the police, so that that there's an
Right.
understanding of what is really going on, and who is part of the protest and who is simply taking advantage of the protests or actually trying to subvert the protests.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to that.
Oh, I mean, thank you, Dr. Carson. You're absolutely, I mean, these are very, very important core issues. And I have several different thoughts I want to share, but in the sit-in movement and in the Freedom Ride movement and in the SNCC movement, students were committed to nonviolence, some more than others, but the core Nashville group had the opportunity and the incredibly rigorous preparation, as you know, of being trained in nonviolence by Reverend James Lawson. And we don't have at this time anything comparable to that kind of rigorous training that's immersed in the culture. So that's kind of our mission at our institute, and everybody here is trying to spread that. I do think, though, Erica Chenoweth says that during the protest movement following the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, that was the largest protest movement in the United States history in terms of numbers, and the most diverse and inclusive. And she said 95% of the protests were nonviolent. And as you say, the 5% are the ones that get the attention. And so I have strong views on this issue, which differ from, this is a very controversial subject among organizers, because there are some that feel like it's not their place to tell anyone how they should protest. But I have to say, from my point of view, two things. One is I'm of the old school, and I have heard James Lawson, who's still alive and going strong, very, very clearly say, we reject the Antifa, we reject the Black Bloc, we reject the sectors that are trying to come in and make it violent. And also, of course, there could be agent provocateur. We have to be very disciplined and say we're not going to, we're going to condemn them. And I think even work with police to cooperate, to identify and isolate people and keep away from violence. That view is kind of, my view may be a minority view on these issues. I'm not sure about that. But even if you share my view, I think actually implementing it is very, very difficult and requires so all the groups I sent to you are doing trainings, all of those trainings. And if you're in the Bay Area, the East Point Peace Academy and others do excellent trainings. And I think if you're interested in being involved, it's important to be involved in those kind of trainings. Yeah. One last thing I want to say about 1964 and Johnson, I want to play you something for 1 minute. I think I have, do I have it here? No, I don't see it right here, but Lyndon Johnson did get the power. I mean, because as you know, King went to Selma, and then a lot of people were brutalized and people were killed. And he marched from Selma to Montgomery. And then the power was transferred, and the legislature created the most important voting rights law of a century. Unfortunately, it's been somewhat undermined by the Supreme Court in recent years. But it was a transformative law. And when it was brought to Congress, President Johnson spoke to Congress and said that the civil rights struggle is our national struggle to overcome the legacy of systemic racism, and we shall overcome. That was Lyndon Johnson, who grew up as a segregationist. And you know, I agree with you. I don't think that we're at a point where Biden is going to say Black Lives Matter. We're going to have massive restructural legislation if we have even an all Democratic Congress, but we can give them the power to do it. Any other feelings, thoughts, questions?
I'd like to just reiterate the importance of young people in this and the
Thank you, Penny.
intergenerational nature of the moment we're in. I've been to a couple of trainings in the last week, and they've largely been implemented by really fabulous, bright, energetic, and physically capable young people.
Yes.
And at the same time, those of us who have a memory perhaps have more passion than we do physical energy at this particular moment. So the alliance between those seems particularly precious to me, and I want to just give a thank you to everyone who's doing that. And the other thing that I came away from one training with yesterday was the idea of affinity groups, that the ways in which we prepare for the possibility of going into the streets or not going into the streets requires us to really look around our lives and see who we want to be there with, that in the name of our safety and solidarity, that we are not just a mass of individuals, but a cohesive, coherent group of people who are there protected by those we trust and can count on, whether that's our family, our friends, or others with whom we choose to align ourselves. So that's just simply one thing to keep in mind as we head into this moment.
Penny, thank you so much. I completely agree. It's essential. If you're considering getting involved in either monitoring voting or in demonstrations, if they arise, it's essential to not go by yourself, to be part of a group, whether it's your small group of friends. The East Point Peace Collective is organizing precisely around this principle of getting into small groups so that you have an affinity group. So I completely agree. And also this other point that this movement, if it has to happen, has to be intergenerational, interracial, and as broad as possible. Yeah. It says Ray P. raised hand. Oh, hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you
Oh,
so
good.
much for your thoughtful and thorough presentation. My name is Ray Phillips. I'm an artist and activist from Atlanta, Georgia, and I work on Art for Peace and have worked on Art for Peace with Dr. Carson over the last 13 years. And I have kind of two separate questions that I'm interested in your thoughts about. The first is, you talked about one or the other winning by a slim margin. I'm curious about your thoughts on there being a potential electoral college tie, the probability of that, and how that could affect a peaceful transition of power. The second question I have is, I'm curious what you would say to the artists of our time and like what they can do in this moment to help augment a peaceful transition of power. Thank you.
Ray, those are great questions. Thank you for that. Let me take them both quickly. So let me, I'm going to go back for just a minute to show you something on the screen. Okay, so this is what the Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says. It says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof. One second. I have to move this. Yeah. as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative shall be appointed elector. So this is what it says. It's very strange and confusing. But what it means is there's a potential that if Trump is successful in sowing confusion and doubt and skepticism and saying that all kinds of votes have to be thrown out as invalid, it's possible that he will go to the state legislatures and say, under the Constitution, it says you get to appoint the electors, and I leave it to your judgment. But of course, the majority of states have all Republican controlled Congress, legislature. So I think this is unlikely, but there are all kinds of frightening scenarios in which there could be appeals to these technical rules. And then if it ended up, it would obviously end up in the Supreme Court. And if you have a conservative based Supreme Court, they're going to say, well, the Constitution says what it says, and it says the states can elect. So it's possible that the Supreme Court would bless something like that. If something like that happened, I believe that would fall into the category of what the Choose Democracy group calls a coup. And we would be in a very difficult situation. And there's all kinds, as you mentioned, there's all kinds of potential scenarios about what could happen that could go wrong in the Electoral College if it's very close. And that's one extreme one. In terms of artists, I feel very strongly that the role of artists is so important. And, again, Dr. Carson can talk about it, but you can't have a movement without music. You can't have a successful movement without music, singing, and all forms of creative expression. And I think artists, musicians, the bread and puppet theater used to have those huge puppets they would bring. I think that's a hugely important element to have the creativity come out in the expression of as part of the movement. So I think there's a critical role.
Jonathan, we have another question from Grande Lum.
Oh, Grant.
Grant.
Hey, Grant. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Jonathan. It's an incredible presentation. I just thought that was a terrific focus on. My name's Grant Lum. I'm a provost at Menlo College, but before that, I was in the Obama administration in the Department of Justice. And this is just quickly to Dr. Carson's point.
I'm sorry. I want to interrupt you 1 second. Just the job that Grant had was he was the head of something called the Community Relations Service, which was part of the Department of Justice. Their job was to enter into Ferguson and all the cities where there's civil unrest and violence and try to mediate a solution. So he was in charge of that for the country. Grant.
Yeah, and it goes to that point, to Dr. Carson's point. I think it's going to be really important to hold police accountable. There's a huge differentiation across this country to how police interact with protesters and nonviolent folks. In Ferguson, we saw what happened. Again, that was during my time working for Obama. In Sanford, it was a very different, even though it was, it was Trayvon Martin getting killed, but the city engaged with the protesters at that point to create and allowed for freedom of speech. And there were no arrests, there was no bottles thrown. I think it's going to be we've been working, the Vital Community Project, a group that I've been affiliated with at Ohio State, is working with bar leaders and faith leaders to hold police more accountable and make sure that they handle this in a way consistent with what Dr. Carson is saying. It's not making sure that the folks who are protesting are doing so safely and making sure that they have that space to do it. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. I think that another category that obviously the people who are peacemakers and communications people and negotiation people and able to create dialogue between different groups are critically important, because that's how you can make alliances and create a much broader movement. Yes, Sudarshan Kapoor.
Well, thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation. Really, I learned a lot. Jonathan, you mentioned a lot of groups actually, including some in the Bay Area. I was wondering actually, some of us do feel that there is going to be some civil unrest. I don't know how you feel about it. Whatever may happen, there will be some. I have talked to some of my friends here. They feel that there is likely to be some civil unrest going to be there like that. So I don't know how you feel about that. That's one thing. The second thing is, are there some religious, interfaith, faith leaders, or some organization, as you mentioned, number of other, we need alliances actually, we need more partners actually. Are there some faith leader, religious leader who have very strong influence? Because we had some demonstrations here. Luckily, we have some faith leaders actually who are able to monitor, manage, and control the violence.
Yeah.
They played a very major role, to be very honest, actually. I actually strongly believe that I don't know whether there are some strong national organization or state organization consisting of the faith leaders, religious leaders. Dr. King coming from himself from the same background, do you feel that there are some organizations of the faith leaders that could or that may play some major role in managing, monitoring, controlling the violence, some civil unrest that is likely to happen, in my feeling?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Where do you live, Sudarshan?
I'm in Fresno, Central Valley.
Okay, interesting. So a couple things. I couldn't agree with you more. I think, and it's interesting you say that because our organization is called the Institute for Nonviolence and Social Justice. It's based at the University of San Francisco. We welcome everybody to be participating. You can see our website. Our main initiative over the next few years is going to be focused on Interfaith Nonviolence Coalition, because I agree with you, that's essential. If you look at the civil rights movement, as you mentioned, Dr. King, he was the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership
That's right.
Conference, which was led by pastors. And Dr. King also was deeply committed to working with clergy from all faiths, from Catholic, Jewish, and every faith. And we have to do the same thing. It's a very important element of it. And I think that's going to be a critical part. I completely agree. Yeah. Any other questions?
Mr. Greenberg, this is well, more of a feeling, touching on the point that you're discussing about the culture that existed with Reverend Lawson and in Nashville. Our modest contribution to that is through nonviolence workshops that we do with high school students on the weekends and during breaks. But it does, your point does show that this is going to be, like what Dr. Carson says, a marathon. And this is an important battle. But yeah, it really calls on us to be in it for the long term, because the Justice Kavanaugh is like 45. And
oh yeah.
These folks will be around for a generation or two. And we'll have to be not only in step with them, but also ahead of them. And the presentation was very helpful because to pull up his words to model exactly how awake we need to be and paying attention and vigilant we need to be was very helpful and enlightening and inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. And it's scary. I agree. Kay, where do you work?
Oh, I'm with the Freedom Center. Forgive me.
I love you guys. You guys are great. One thing I want to call on Barwande next, but I want to say, for example, following up on what Dr. Carson said, without a question, especially when COVID ends, we're going to need massive nonviolent protests in a huge movement to address climate change, and it's being led by young people. But what scares me the most about the Supreme Court is that they have interpretation of the Constitution that will, it's set up to say that even if we're successful in having major legislation, they will say that it's unconstitutional and invalid. So we're heading for major struggles for a long time, but those struggles will fail for sure without giving power to the legislation and to the whole society to understand what needs to happen through nonviolence. Yeah, Barwende, this is Father Barwende Sane from Burkina Faso.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I am an African nonviolent activist, and I am studying at USF and working with the Lane Center, also collaborating with the Institute of Nonviolence. So mine is not a question, but just a real warm expression of gratitude to you, Jonathan, because I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot in this, I would say, formation to face real situation coming. From Africa, we also have many elections pointing and coming soon. And in listening to you, I am also taking a lot of notes. Of course, I'm not a citizen, but I am really a little bit scary when I see how people around me are really afraid. And from outside, we know the US is a great model. And you know, when things are going very good here, developing countries are in peace. In Africa, we used to say, when the elephants are unrest, the grass is suffering. So if peace is here, the rest of the world will really enjoy it. But if the US is unable to spread a good model, that will be questionable for some elections in developing and poor countries over Africa. So I really appreciate all of these great contributions. It's empowering, and it will be my real pleasure to share all of these reflections with some of my friends in West Africa, in the Central African Republic. Yeah, thank you, and keep pushing in these great ideas, mainly after the elections. And I like also the opening for the question related to the climate. This is really important. We need to mobilize many energies and people to help build more racial and ecological justice.
That's right.
Thank you.
Father Sane, thank you so much. And I want to say that we have a lot to learn from all of the struggles, nonviolent struggles in Africa. And we, you know, I don't know if you were there when Stephen Zunis spoke about Sudan had a massive democratic revolution that's tenuous, but throughout a autocratic, cruel, genocidal leader through organized nonviolence that was disciplined. So we have a lot to learn from movements all over the world, including in Africa. And of course, we're very aware of how many brutal regimes are still, unfortunately, in power in many places in Africa that need our support to the people who are trying to overthrow them peacefully.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Jonathan, I'm going to jump in here real quick. This is Alyssa, everybody. I appreciate so much that you invited some folks from your network onto the call today, and I want to extend a warm invitation to everybody to join us again. And we do these calls every Friday at 11. And if you would like to be invited, please leave your email address in the chat, and I will include you on the distribution list for invitations for future calls. And to just give everybody an idea of what's coming up next week, we will have a new network member, Delano Lewis, will be speaking to us. He's the former ambassador to South Africa under President Clinton. He was the president of NPR and has a long history of civil service and unique experience in the Peace Corps. and he will be talking to us about his background and what he's currently working on. So Delano, you want to just say a quick hello right now?
Yes, thank you very much. I had to unmute, but thank you so much, Alyssa, and to the network. I'm excited about becoming a member and look forward to next week where I'll give some of my thoughts. But I just was taken by the conversation today, Jonathan Greenberg. It was excellent, very well done. I have so many connections to this group, and I'll just say quickly that I served as chief of staff to Delegate Walter Fauntleroy in the District of Columbia. And before that, I was legislative assistant to Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts, and he was only Black in the United States Senate. So I had lived in Washington for some 35 years, and I understood that system. But working for Walter Fauntleroy, who was a young Baptist minister, confidant to Dr. Martin Luther King, and Andy Young was also a congressman from Atlanta, and they were part of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I was just a young staffer there, but I got to meet Coretta Scott King and get a sense of the movement. But I was in law school during the 60s and graduated 63 and spent time in the federal government and in business. And obviously I was excited about my appointment as U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, just as President Mandela had stepped down and Thabo Mbeki had become the president. So I had a chance to meet Mandela on a number of occasions, and a giant of a person. So the connections to nonviolence with Gandhi and King and Mandela, I have some real affection for because they are my heroes. So keep doing what you're doing, Jonathan. Their comments were well taken. I just have one other comment on Dr. Claiborne Carson. I'm sorry, Dr. Carson's comments about what happens next with Biden-Harris. And one thing to keep in mind, if we've learned anything from Trump, business as usual can be turned on its head. And when we look at the vice president's office with Kamala Harris, I think we're going to see some other kinds of progressive thoughts and ideas. So Biden may not have the mindset and focus to turn things upside down, but he's got a vice president, I think, who has some real, I think, interesting ideas. And if we keep up the pressure that this group has talked about, we can make some things happen. Thank you.
I want to thank you. I look forward to meeting you next week. Thank you for your comments. And I think as a way to conclude, I like what you said, which is that in the unlikely but possible worst case scenario that there's a seizure of power or an attempt to seize power, I think that we all have to organize to peacefully make it clear to the business community and to all of the people, all the schools and the universities and all the companies and the whole society that business as usual cannot happen, that this is not okay, and we will not support it. And when that happens, it won't take long for Wall Street and for people who have power in this country to say, this is not going to work. We're not going to support this coup. So I thank you for framing it so simply. And I want to, I'd like to conclude, Dr. Carson, can you hear me? Yeah, I'd like you, because we have a number of new people here that have put their emails. Can you just to conclude and share, because many of them don't know what the Gandhi King Global Network is and your vision for it and why we're gathering. Can you share with them?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain it in my mind is that I feel that there's billions of people around the world who in some measure believe in human rights, but they are not connected. They are isolated in many places. And I think that our main goal is to find some ways of bringing them together, because many of the tools of nonviolence only work at scale. You know, the protests against apartheid in South Africa would not have worked without boycotts. Boycotts require lots and lots of participants. So even if, I remember the days when we wouldn't eat grapes until the situation for farm workers was improved. So, sometimes just a small amount of effort by a large number of people can change the world. And I think that that's in some ways the goal.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful group. Thanks to everyone for allowing me to share my thoughts and feelings with you. Please check out our website, the USF Institute for Nonviolence and Social Justice. And if you scroll down, you'll see all of our upcoming events as well. We actually, on the election, we have, in the next few weeks, we have David Cole speaking, who's the National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and Pamela Carlin, who is one of the top election law experts in the country based at Stanford. So please join us for any of those, and look forward to seeing you next week for our talk by Ambassador Lewis.
And two quick things, Jonathan, you're going to send me links that I'll share with the group of the different resources that you introduced us to today.
Yes.
Okay, and I'll get that out to everybody later today.
Okay, that's great.
Nyla Rosen from the Freedom Center had an announcement. Go ahead, Nyla.
Yes, thank you again, Jonathan, for the beautiful and timely presentation, and to Alyssa and Dr. Carsons and Foster and Truman for arranging these sessions. We wanted to also note on this topic, the Freedom Center is hosting a lecture on reparations, racial healing, and transformation with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee out of Texas, Congresswoman Barbara Lee out of Oakland, and Assembly Black Caucus Chair Dr. Shirley Weber out of San Diego, who just passed a reparations bill that Governor Newsom signed for the state of California. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has a House Bill 40 before the U.S. Congress, and of course a Truth and Racial Healing reconciliation bill by Barbara Lee. It's next Thursday, the 12th at 7 p.m. They are filming it and working on their work immediately after the election. So it will, of course, be addressing this point. Again, it's next Thursday, the 12th at 7.
And I'll forward that as well. I received an email about that, and I'll go ahead and forward that to the network.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Just one sentence about Sheila Jackson Lee. She was with me when I went to India to mark the 50th anniversary of King's trip to India. So I traveled with her throughout India, and so she's a wonderful person to have.
That's beautiful.
Actually, before we close, I want to say hello and welcome Ken Budigan, who just came on. Ken, I was talking about you earlier in terms of your work with Pache Bene, but also your reflections on nonviolence at this time. And I'll refer everybody to the link.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was fantastic. And thank you everyone for participating. It's great to see the old faces as well as the new faces, and keep coming back, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and weekend, and keep fighting the good fight.
And also, I want to quote Dr. King in that beautiful film that Dr. Carson found, which is, you know what to do. You know who to vote for. You know what to do, and go for it. Take care.
Absolutely.
Thank you.